The Eldar, or Eldari, are one of those races that often fall to the wayside in Games Workshop's release schedule in favour of yet more Primus Lieutenants. As such, some of the more iconic units of this race are a little outdated. Beyond Dire Avengers and Howling Banshees, all the other infantry-based aspect warriors are only available in limited poses and in Finecast. In this video, I'll be attempting to do my bit to help fix this problem by using the power of kitbashing. I'm Pete the Wargamer, and in this video I'll be attempting to build a plastic and more modern looking Strikiing Scorpion. So the basic structure of a Strikiing Scorpion sees them carrying two close combat weapons, which would greatly influence my decision on what I was going to be using as a base model. Dire Avengers and Basic Guardians both come with two-handed weapons, but luckily the Howling Banshees are all armed with shuriken pistols and a close combat weapon. Therefore, these would serve as my starting point. I began by removing the parts required to build a Howling Banshee from the sprue before cleaning up the components. Once I had selected the base kit, I could begin on replicating the Strikiing Scorpion aesthetic. For the most part, they follow the same lightly armoured bodysuits as other aspect warriors and guardians. They do, however, feature a series of raised ridges across their lower legs, shoulders and parts of their torso. To replicate these, I chose to use some 1.2mm thick plastic rod. I could have used some putty, such as green stuff, instead, but using the rod allowed me to maintain a consistent diameter across the model. Plus, I personally find it easy to work with. I began by applying the ridges to the legs. To do this, I took the rod and bent it into a roughly 90-degree angle. At this thickness, the rod is still pretty pliable, so this should be fairly easy to do with just your fingers. This corner was then clipped away from the rest of the rod so that a few millimeters sat either side of the bend. With this L-shaped piece of rod created, I could compare it against the leg. This allowed me to check whether or not the angle of the bend was correct, or if the length of the rod was too long. Once I was happy with the shape and size, I glued the rod into place using some regular old plastic glue. With the first ridge in place, I just needed to repeat this process across the legs. In total, I added 3 ridges to each of the shins and 2 across the top of both feet. Finally, I was left with these completed legs and feet. With the legs done, I then continued to apply these ridges to the back of the torso too. The Howling Banshee featured a small raised bump on the back, which first needed to be trimmed away. I used my scalpel to carefully trim away the bump, creating a flat surface in the center of the back. On this newly smooth surface, I then repeated the same bending, trimming and gluing method that I had deployed across the legs. These upwardly pointing ridges were added as part of this step. For all of the steps so far, I had kept the components separate from each other, just to make working on those ridges much easier. With them completed, I could assemble the legs and torso together. As I've already mentioned, the Strikiing Scorpions carry a shuriken pistol and a close combat weapon, specifically a Scorpion chainsword. The Howling Banshee arm carried a power sword, which meant that I needed to replace it. The source of the chainsword came from the Zangor upgrade pack that is normally used for using Age of Sigmar Zangors in 40k. On the sprue are a number of ornately detailed chainsword with curved detailings that fitted nicely with the more flowing aesthetics of Eldar weaponry. To attach these two items together, I began by clipping the chainsword's blade away from its handle, before trimming and cleaning up the cut using my scalpel. Similarly, the sword blade was clipped away from the arm, retaining the crossguard. With my knife, I then smoothed the top of the crossguard flat. With the sword and chainsword blades prepped, I could begin the process of joining them together. At this point, the chainsword blade didn't fit perfectly into the upwardly curving sword handle. This required me to make a few small trims and cuts to the bottom of the chainsword to ensure it could fit snugly into place. Once I was happy that everything was fitting together, I could bring in my glue and attach the two parts. With the chainsword attached to the arms, I could go ahead and attach both arms to the torso. With the arms in place, I could now add some shoulder pads. Ordinarily, the Howling Banshee comes with a single shoulder pad that is usually joined to the mane of hair. Unfortunately, Strikiing Scorpions wear 2, which meant I couldn't use the one that came with the kit. Instead, I found the perfect answer to my problem in the Necromunda Van Saar kit. Not only were the shoulder pads the perfect size and shape to be attached to the Howling Banshee's bodies, but they also came with 3 bands that could be painted yellow. With a pair of these chosen, I then attached them to the model. At this stage, all that was left to do was to create the helmet. To achieve the Strikiing Scorpion style helmet by modifying a Banshee helmet would prove tricky, but not impossible. So I started by trimming down the height of the helmet with my knife. I carefully shaved away small pieces at a time to not only reduce the size of the helmet, but also to change the angle so that it sloped further back from the forehead rather than going upwards. With the shape of the helmet more in line with the Strikiing Scorpions, I could begin adding the iconic Manda blasters to the side. But first I need to remove the vents positioned at either side of the helmet, as these would be in the way of where I wanted to attach them. These were first clipped away before being smoothed flat with my knife. To create the Manda blasters, I turned to the Dark Eldar splinter pistols. These can be found in a few different kits, such as the Witches and the Kabbalite kits. As such, they're pretty cheap to buy from bits resellers too. With 2 of these sourced, I began by using my clippers to remove the rounded canister from the rest of the pistol. With the canister removed, I used my knife to remove any leftover parts of the pistol. Once done, I drilled out the slightly more narrow ends of the canister, helping to complete the Manda blaster. With the canister removed, I went about comparing the Manda blaster against the side of the helmet. The still rounded nature of the canister meant that it wouldn't quite fit properly, at least not yet, so I started flattening this out using my knife. The first Manda blaster was glued into place before I repeated the process on the other side of the helmet. By now, the front of the helmet was completed, but the back still needed work. Before I could begin working on this though, I went about attaching the Howling Banshee's neck. As I wasn't going to be adding the larger Banshee mane, I could clip the curved support from the neck before gluing the remaining part of the neck to the front of the helmet. The final step in building the helmet was to create the dreadlock-like hairstyle of the Strikiing Scorpions. There were a couple of ways to do this. The first was to use putty, like green stuff, or build it using a plastic rod, which is what I ultimately chose to do. I began with some 1.2mm thick rod and clipped this down into a set of roughly 3 to 4mm long sections. I repeated this until I had around 6 or 7 cylinders. These were then glued vertically to the back of the head using some super glue. I laid these up to help to create the desired bulk. To help link these to the first set of rods and the top of the helmet, I used some slightly finer plastic rod of 1mm thickness this time around. These were clipped to length after being measured against the existing set. Each of those larger rods needed one of these finer rods linking it to the top of the helmet, so the length did vary depending on the positioning, with some being longer than others. Once all of these had been attached, I could glue the completed head to the body. And with that, all I needed to do was to paint and base the miniature, which left me with this. And here we have the completed Strikiing Scorpion, painted in the iconic greens and yellows of their aspect temple. Now that the model has been given a coat of paint, it's pretty clear from a quick glance exactly what it is supposed to represent. So at the beginning of the video, my mission was to create a slightly fresher looking Strikiing Scorpion using plastic components, and I think I've succeeded in doing this. While the dreadlocks at the back aren't perfect and some of the more ornate and intricate detailings are missing, it still has all the familiar armor stylings and weapons of a Strikiing Scorpion. So if you're looking for a slightly fresher take on some Aspect Warriors, hopefully you found this video helpful. If you enjoyed the Xenos style conversion, then please do let me know, along with any other ideas you might have for other distinctly non-Space Marine conversions you would like to see me tackle in the future. And let me know what you thought about this Aspect Warrior conversion too. So the final thing to say is a massive thank you to all of my supporters. Whether you support me on Patreon, buy me a coffee, or you just use my affiliates links, your help is what keeps this channel alive, and it's what allows me to build these conversions for you. If you would like to help me out, then you can check out my description for all of the relevant links. And so until next time, thanks for watching, and goodbye.